Chapter 15. Colin kissed Luna until he realized he'd slid the strap of her sundress over her shoulder. Quickly releasing her, he repositioned the strap. Sorry. He cleared his throat. Between you and the smell of old books, I lose all sense of propriety. She swayed a little, and her eyes were dark and slightly unfocused. She licked her lips. Me too. On top of that, I've smeared your lipstick. Reaching into his back pocket, he pulled out a handkerchief. Here. She waved it away. If I get dark pink lipstick on that white handkerchief, it will never come out. Then I'll keep it as a souvenir. He cupped the back of her head. Here, I'll do it. Hold still. He carefully wiped her mouth. You'll have to start over. I'm afraid. Gradually her dazed expression was replaced with a mischievous smile. I'm not the only one wearing raspberry lipstick. Oh, he hadn't thought of that, but then he wasn't in the habit of kissing females in the middle of bookstores or in any public place for that matter. He'd never been overcome by the need to kiss someone immediately until he'd met Luna. Allow me. Taking the handkerchief from him, she reached up and dabbed at his mouth. Y'all have such a sensuous lower lip. I'll bet you say that to all the chaps. I've never said it to anyone before. I know. I was teasing you again, and I shouldn't do that. He caught her hand in both of his and kissed her fingertips. Knowing I'm your first lover is an endless source of pride and joy to me. You've given me a priceless gift, Luna. No less than you gave to me. I feel as if how would I describe it? Something was missing in my life and I knew that, but I didn't understand how different I would feel now that She blew out a breath. Like I said, I'm not sure how to describe it. He kept holding her hand because he couldn't seem to stop touching her. Complete. She nodded. Yes, complete. I feel complete now, as if I know what the world is about. I'm so grateful, Colin. He was mesmerized by the warmth in her eyes. Maybe we should skip buying the books and check into the hotel. We can order books online. She smiled. That's no fun. But we could have a whole lot of fun in that hotel room. I like books, but not enough to give up a chance to. She laid a finger over his mouth. We're here now. We might as well pick up some books. Removing her finger, she chucked him under the chin. We don't have to stay long, but we should do it. And then we can go back to the hotel? Yes. Excellent. He picked up his shopping bag and looped the handles over his forearm. This will take me about 5 minutes. I'll take this one and this one and... Colin, you're not even looking at them. What on earth have you got there? I don't know. I like the red leather cover. He glanced at the spine of the book in his hand. The Mating Habits of Crustaceans. We don't need that book. Or... She peered at the spines of his other choices. Fun with Chemistry or The Secret Life of Snails. Put them back. I don't know. That last one sounds kind of sexy. Maybe they dress up in black lingerie. Now you're being silly. She glanced around. No wonder. We're standing smack in the middle of the science section. Let's move to the fiction aisle. Wait. He spied a book on a top shelf and pulled it down. I've never been able to find this one. I even did a rare book search with no luck. And here it is. He held the book up so she could see. Her expression softened. I didn't think about you finding astronomy books here. Colin looked at his treasure. Lowell's theories on Mars have been disproven. But I wanted to have this anyway. He glanced at the price written on the inside cover. As I thought, they don't know how much this book is worth. Should go for several $100s. So y'all found a bargain. He laughed. Every Scotsman's dream. Okay, now we can go to the fiction section. I found my treasure. Those words taunted him as he followed Luna over to the well-populated fiction aisle. He'd found his treasure, all right, and it wasn't this book. He could take that home and place it on a shelf in the library at Glenbarra. But the real treasure, the lover he'd waited a lifetime to find, would not be coming home with him. He wouldn't let thoughts like that ruin his time with her, though. He wasn't about to be. What name had she used? Oh yes, Debbie Downer. He refused to be her twin brother Donnie Downer. So he'd enjoy the devil out of watching Luna choose her books. She chortled with glee each time she found one for the growing collection in his arms. You should choose some, she said after she'd stacked up enough hardbacks to reach almost to his chin. I can hold those. Considering the weight, he doubted it, but it was sweet of her to offer. You. Go ahead and pick them out. I'll be the muscle of the operation. Are they getting too heavy? He wouldn't admit it if they were. I'm fine, but I suppose we have to. Consider the weight limit of the helicopter. He had no idea what that was. But he was ready to finish up here and whisk her away to their hotel. All right. She held up a tattered paperback copy of Lady Chatterley. This will be the last one. He smiled at her choice. I should have known you tracked that down, although it doesn't look to be in very good shape. Oh, it's not. She leaned close. It's already falling apart. Really? It's marked way down because the glue isn't holding. A few good shakes and pages would go everywhere. She winked at him. I see. Then maybe we need to get it back to the hotel room before something happens. Good plan. Let's check out. She walked ahead of him with a decided sway to her hips. He couldn't remember her walking like that before. Unless he was mistaken, his former virgin was turning into a vixen, and he was all for it. Setting the books on the counter, he handed her his shopping bag from their clothes expedition, took out his wallet and extracted several bills. This should cover the books. I'll be right back. She looked surprised, but he dashed out of the bookstore before she could ask any questions. He'd noticed the way she'd gazed longingly at the flower stalls, and this was the kind of day that called for a romantic gesture. When he returned, he found her standing just inside the door of the bookstore, a sturdy double bag of books and the 2 shopping bags at her feet. When she saw the bouquet in his hand, her eyes widened and she covered her mouth. He held out the flowers. For you, milady. She took the bouquet hesitantly, glancing from the multicolored gerbera daisies to his face. Then she looked at the flowers again, almost as if she couldn't quite believe he'd done such a thing. He'd hoped she might smile. Instead, tears welled in her eyes. He panicked. You don't like them? Are they the wrong kind? Tell me what you like and I'll get those instead. I just wanted to. I love them. She launched herself into his arms, grabbed him around the neck and kissed him, even as tears dribbled down her cheeks and flavored the kiss with salt. Cupping her face in both hands, he brushed at the tears with his thumbs. He still wasn't sure if he'd done something good or something bad by giving her the flowers, but her kiss seemed to be saying he'd done something good. Finally she drew back. No one's ever given me flowers before. Her voice was thick with emotion. We've had bouquets of flowers from the garden all around Whittier House, but that's not the same as having someone buy them just for Emmy. She paused to sniff. A flower virgin too? I thought maybe I'd made a mistake. She shook her head violently. It was wonderful of y'all to surprise me with these. They're such happy flowers and all different colors. We need to hurry to the hotel so we can put them in some water. What about a vase? We don't want them to die, and I'm not sure a water glass will work. We'll ask room service to send something up. He looked into her eyes, needing reassurance that she really was happy about his attempt to be romantic. Honestly, Colin, I love them. He took a shaky breath. All right. You had me worried there, but if you say so, then all right. He leaned down and picked up the weighty sack of books and both shopping bags. Let's get a cab. All the way to the hotel, Luna kept looking at her flowers. She really did love them, and they were so much more imaginative than roses. Every time she thought of Colin rushing out to buy flowers for her, she choked up. But that wasn't the only reason. When he'd presented them, he'd said milady. If he hadn't recently told her what his mate would be called, she wouldn't have thought anything about it. But he had just told her, and yet she imagined. His choice of words had been unconscious. He couldn't know that being addressed like that taunted her with what she'd never have. Consequently, she'd become a blubbering idiot, for which she was embarrassed. She wasn't a crier, had never been one, so far as she could remember. She'd shed tears over Geraldine, and that was to be expected, but she wasn't the type to tear up over a bouquet of flowers and a misplaced endearment. She couldn't blame it on stress because she'd had far more stress than this in her 27 years of life, so she'd blame it on lack of sleep. One thing she wouldn't blame it on, falling in love with Colin MacDowell. That would be the stupidest thing she could possibly do. Did you still want to see the picture of your grandparents' house? She'd forgotten all about it. Sharing a kiss with Colin in a deserted aisle of a bookstore could do that to her. Being alone with him in a hotel room would likely have the same effect. I'd like to see it, she said. Taking out his phone, he pushed a few buttons and handed it to her. There it is. Wow. The stately two-story was white with hunter green shutters. It looks like a mansion. They've done well, but they're turning the whole thing into offices for the foundation and temporary housing for homeless were, so they won't be living there much longer. That was all on the foundation website. Any pictures of them? There might have been a couple of small ones, but I don't know how well they'll show up on a tiny screen. Want me to try? Sure. She gave him the phone, although it might not matter whether she could see the pictures or not. She'd nearly made up her mind to meet them tomorrow, so she'd get an up-close and personal view then. This is the best I can do. I've magnified it as much as I can. He passed over the phone again. Luna already knew from pictures of her mother that she looked almost exactly like Sophie, so she didn't expect to see much family resemblance in the two 70-something people gazing back at her from the small image in the phone. Instead, she felt the shock of instant recognition. Edwina's chin was like hers, rounded and yet firm and strong-looking. As for Jacques, his ears were small and close to his head, exactly like Luna's. Sophie's had stuck out a little bit, which was why she'd always worn her hair long. The light on the screen faded, and Luna punched a button to bring it back. She couldn't stop looking at those two people. Their blood ran in her veins. Can you see it well enough? Colin leaned closer and started to take the phone. Maybe I can. She maintained her grip on the phone. I can see it fine. The picture was a posed studio shot, and so she couldn't get a real sense of what they were like, because they seemed a little stiff. But they were both smiling, and they had wonderful smiles, although that part wasn't familiar. Luna's smile was pure. Sophie. Edwina's hair was a combination of blonde and silver that looked natural. Jacques had a receding hairline, and what was left of his hair was quite gray. He had the kindest eyes and a bushy mustache. I think I would like them, she said softly. Everything about them seems positive. I know. She finally lifted her gaze from the screen. But I can't forget that their son died because of my mother's behavior. More than 27 years ago, Colin said. They've had 27 years to come to grips with what happened and learn to forgive. Or 27 years to grow more bitter about losing their only child. Colin sighed. I won't tell you that's impossible, but if they were bitter, why would they start this foundation? I think there's a better chance that they would embrace you as their granddaughter. I want to see them, but I want to go with a cover story. Will you help me with that? I'll do whatever you need. That was all she had to hear. What if we call on them to suggest using the opening weekend of Whittier House as a benefit for their foundation? Colin stared at her. That's bloody brilliant, lass. It is? Don't forget it will reduce our profit that weekend. I may be a Scot, but I'm not stupid. Tying in with a charitable cause will mean cross-promotion both for them and for us. Guests are able to say they were at the opening of Whittier House Inn, and they contributed to the Byron Reynaud Foundation at the same time. I mostly wanted an excuse to see them other than announcing I'm their long-lost granddaughter. He frowned, clearly disappointed. So you're not going to tell them that? Not yet. Maybe not ever. But what about your name? She'd been wrestling with that problem, the only real glitch in her scheme. We may be able to gloss over that. For one thing, I've always thought the MacDowell name should be on all the literature about the inn. Your title will impress everyone. But won't they expect me to be around all the time if my name's on the brochure? I'll say you jet back and forth between your two homes. That will sound worldly and extravagant. We'll put a welcome letter from you in each room. And I know, we'll put a portrait of you wearing a kilt and whatever else goes with that in some prominent place. Colin groaned. I really hate that plan. Do you have a kilt? Not with me. But you do have one. And that other thing, the pouch deal. A sporran. I have that, and the proper cap, the whole outfit. She grinned at him. When you talk about it, your bro gets stronger. Maybe. In addition to the portrait, we should have a video of. No, by God. I'll not be making a video as the Laird of Glenbarra strutting around in his plaid. Ah, Colin. It would be so great. We could have it on a continuous loop in the library. You're having me on, aren't you? She reached over and stroked his cheek. A little. Y'all were so horrified at the idea of a video, but I really want to play up the Laird angle and minimize my role. I'm just Luna Thisbe, the one who runs the office. Who? Thisbe is my middle name. My mother got it from a story about two ill-fated lovers. I know the story. I've always hated that middle name. As if Luna isn't unusual enough, she saddled me with Thisbe too. But it works as a last name if I want to cloak myself for now. I can even tell the staff I'm dropping Reynaud so people don't get confused and think I'm part of the foundation. Colin gave her a wry smile. It would be so much simpler if you just told them. Too risky. I realize eventually the word may get out and I'll have to deal with that, but if we have Whittier House off and running by then, it may not matter who I am, especially if you're the visible part of the operation. You do know I won't be particularly visible at all, don't you? I know. He wasn't even gone yet and she was already imagining how desperately she'd miss him. Enough. She'd already had one bout of tears today, and that was one too many. But you could be, if you'd make that video. Chapter 16. Colin wasn't about to push Luna to reveal her identity to her grandparents. His instinct was always to face problems squarely, and then take whatever came of that, but it wasn't his fight. She had to decide, and for all he knew she was right to postpone the confrontation. But if her grandmother was George Trevelyan's aunt, the fat would hit the fire. Eventually. Colin didn't like surprises and he didn't think Luna's grandparents would appreciate stumbling upon the information sometime in the future. Besides that, Luna would have to live with a sword hanging over her head, knowing the moment of truth could come at any time. But for now he was happy to be out of the cab through the hotel registration process and stepping into yet another express elevator with her this time. Headed for the penthouse of a hotel owned by Trevelyan Enterprises. He should have guessed that George would reserve the penthouse for them. Yes, it was a generous gesture, but it was also a display of wealth and power. As a pack alpha, Colin knew all about that. I felt a little funny checking in with only 2 shopping bags full of clothes, a bouquet of flowers, and a double grocery bag full of old books. Luna said as the elevator started its smooth glide upward. Especially when they gave us the key to the penthouse. That George is something else. He's an alpha is what he is. Someday he'll call in his favors, Colin said. It would be rude to reject his generosity, and his help has been invaluable, but there will be a price, and I can't believe a round of golf at St. Andrews will settle the bill. Are y'all worried about it? No, but I'll stay alert. She lifted her chin. Then I'll stay alert too. I'm learning something about pack politics. You're the first pack alpha I ever met and George is the second. Is that a representative sample? He couldn't help smiling. She was the most entertaining female he'd ever come across, were or human. I couldn't say, but there is often a similarity in how we operate. For example, those 2 big cushy chairs in George's office are designed to put the visitor at a disadvantage. I did feel sort of small and short when I sank into one. Her eyebrows lifted. So that's why you didn't sit down. George didn't sit down either. But even if he'd gone back to his desk chair, he still would have had the superior position because the desk chair would have kept him at a higher level than the other 2 chairs. Fascinating. If I ever go in that office again, I'll perch on the arm too. There's no reason I have to sink down into that chair and be swallowed up like quicksand. True, but you're not an alpha, so you don't have to worry so much about it. I don't like the idea of being intimidated though, and can't females be alphas if they want? He blinked. Well, yes, they can. There are several females who run their packs. Recently Nadia Henderson took over the reins of the Chicago pack. But he paused, realizing that what he'd been about to say might not be true anymore. But a half-breed can't be an alpha? He took a deep breath. That used to be true, but 2 alpha males from the Wallace pack in New York have taken human mates. Logically, one of their offspring might end up leading the pack someday. That sobering thought hadn't occurred to him until now. Really? She gazed at him as the floor numbers flashed by on the display. I'm guessing you're not totally on board with that program. It worries me. So much could go wrong. She nodded. I suppose so. But thanks for telling me about the Wallaces. Now I feel less freakish. Guilt assailed him. Luna, you're not. You're right. I'm not at all freakish. That's a bad choice of words. But I have felt unusual. And it helps to know that I'm not. There's so much I don't know about the world, and I've been afraid to ask and expose my ignorance. You can ask me anything. Her eyes sparkled with mischief. Anything. Whatever you have a question about. Then I have a question that I could only ask a male, and you're elected. What's your favorite female body part? As he started to answer, the elevator slid to a stop and a mellow chime sounded as the doors rolled open with the barest of whispers. You're not saved by the bell either, your much honored Cernus. I don't need to be. He picked up the bag of books, supporting it from underneath because it was threatening to rip. Can you get the other bags? Sure. She picked both up in one hand and kept her grip on the flowers with the other. He tilted his head toward the open elevator doors. After you. She went out but turned back to him. So what's your favorite female body part? He stepped into the foyer. He could hardly wait until she turned around and saw the view they had, but she seemed intent on this question of hers. My favorite body part, particularly in your case, is your. My what? Her eyes lit up with anticipation. Your mind, he said. The merriment in her expression changed, and her face glowed with obvious pleasure. That's not what I thought you'd say, but it's a great answer. What did you think I'd say? Smiling, she shook her head. I'm not telling. We can talk about it when we're naked. That was all it took for him to decide to set the books down right there, in the foyer. Time to get on with the festivities. I'm looking forward to that. But first you need to see something. Stepping toward her, he grasped her shoulders and turned her gently around. She gasped and dropped her bags to the floor, although he noticed that she still maintained a death grip on those flowers. He wondered if she'd crushed the stems by now. With an arm around her shoulders, he guided her toward the floor-to-ceiling windows. The drapes were open to the view of the sparkling blue sound, but more drapes ringed the entire curved boundary of the living room. Colin suspected that windows circled the entire top floor and provided a 360-degree panorama. He was eager to find out because he thought their plans for the evening were about to change. Luna resisted him as he urged her toward the view. Don't forget I have a touch of acrophobia. What about the helicopter? You seemed fine during the flight. With Knox in charge. The green monster reared its ugly head again. For some reason that doesn't bother me, maybe because I'm strapped in. Here. I'm free to fall out. No, you're not. He tightened his grip. I've got you. She relaxed slightly. Okay. Just don't let go. I won't. Do I have your word as a MacDowell? You do. Then let's see this view that George gave us. The tension left her body and she walked easily toward the tall windows. Her trust humbled him. She had put all her faith in him, and not only to keep her from falling from a great height to the pavement below. She trusted him. With her body and on some level with her heart. He couldn't shake the feeling that she'd given it and wouldn't ever take it back. Luna Thisbe indeed. He didn't want her name to seal her fate, but all the signs pointed to that very thing. As Luna approached the window with Colin's strong arms securely around her shoulders, her heart raced, but with exhilaration instead of fear. She'd secretly been a little nervous about going up in the Space Needle because she'd seen pictures of the observation platform and it looked something like this, with people standing right next to the abyss. Yet here she was, gazing out across the sound from such a height that the boats looked like toys in the water, and because Colin held her close to his side she was not afraid. It really is spectacular, she said. George is showing off, but I don't care. I have a suggestion though. You want to moon-passing airliners? He laughed. No, but go ahead if you want. I suppose they wouldn't be close enough. The passengers would have to use binoculars to see us. The truth is, nobody can see us up here, unless maybe from a passing helicopter, but even that's not likely. I think we could run around naked up here without a soul noticing. She glanced up at him. I sense this has something to do with your suggested change in plans. But I need to know if your heart's set on eating at the top of the Space Needle. I doubt we could do that naked. His lips twitched. That would be frowned upon. She scanned the horizon and pointed off to their left. Isn't that it, right? Over there. Yes. It is somewhat taller than we are. And you did say that alpha males like to seek high ground. I did say that. But this is very high ground right here, and more than that. It's exclusive high ground, which counts for a lot in an alpha's world. I see. She enjoyed listening to him make his case, even though she'd already chosen But if you really want to see the most spectacular view in Seattle, we should go to the Space Needle. You're quite sure we can't eat there naked? He glanced down at her with a smile. No, we cannot. No shoes, no shirt, no pants, no underwear, no service. How restrictive. He nodded. Quite restrictive. Then I'm thinking, who needs it? See that, lass? My favorite part of your body just made me a very happy were. But if I'm going to cancel our restaurant reservations, I'll need to let go of you to do it. I feel like I'm riding a bike with training wheels, but let's find out whether I panic when you let go. He gradually released her. How's that? So far so good. How about I take those flowers? Oh. She glanced down at them and realized she'd been holding them very tightly. I think I choked them to death. Look on the bright side. If I cut off the mangled part of the stem, they'll now fit in a water glass. And judging from this place, the glasses will be waterford, so I suppose all is well. It is, Luna. Definitely is. If you think you'll be fine here, I'll make the call and organize your flowers. Otherwise, I can guide you back to the sofa. Now that's ridiculous. She flapped her hand at him. Go. Make your call. Fix the flowers. I will. As he stepped back and consulted his phone, she began edging to her left, crab-like. She'd never stayed in a penthouse before. She'd cleaned plenty of them, but she'd managed to do that without standing right next to the windows that always seemed oversized in a penthouse. She supposed that was the idea. Eventually she reached the spot where the drapes were still drawn, but being a clever female, she'd already figured out that the drapes disguised what was essentially a goldfish bowl of a sweet. Walls divided up the circle into wedge-shaped pieces, but the edge of the bowl was all glass. Without Colin here to steady her, she would have hated it, but he coaxed her to stretch, to push her boundaries. Grabbing hold of the rod hanging at the edge of the drapes, she began to pull as she sidestepped along. If she kept looking out instead of down, that helped. Fools who didn't mind leaning against windows would have a view of the street below, but Luna saw no percentage in that. Gazing out, however, made her feel like a hawk in flight. And that was a sensation worth having. How's it going? Colin came up beside her. He'd taken off his sport coat and rolled back the sleeves of his shirt. He looked totally hot. It's going good. She gave him a tentative smile. If I can stay in this room for 3 or 4 weeks, I'll probably cure myself of acrophobia. Was your mother bothered by it? No, although New Orleans isn't known for its skyscrapers. But I used to panic if she took me out on a balcony in the French Quarter. Considering that, you're doing very well. He glanced behind him. I don't know if you noticed the wet bar, but there's champagne chilling in a bucket. And a plate of strawberries and finger sandwiches. Someone must have whisked it up here while we were checking in. She clutched the drapes. Do y'all want some? I do. I feel like celebrating. What? Not what? Who? I want to celebrate Luna Reynaud. Luna Thisbe. Although she corrected him, she was thrilled by his extravagant comment. No one had ever suggested celebrating her. You can be Luna Thisbe tomorrow if you insist upon it, but tonight be Luna Reynaud, the were who convinced me to hang on to a piece of my past. He held out his hand. All right. She placed her hand in his strong, warm grip and he drew her away from the window into a somewhat cozy area that contained a curved sectional covered in ivory leather. A wet bar had been placed behind it, and she saw the champagne bucket and munchies he'd mentioned. Nothing in this penthouse could truly be called cozy, though. Even with the drapes closed, she would still know that the fishbowl was just behind the curtain. But Colin had shortened the stems on her daisies, put them in a whiskey glass, and set the glass on a black granite coffee table tucked into the curve of the sectional. The daisies brought warmth and hominess to what was otherwise a rather intimidating space. Sit right there. Colin pointed to a spot on the sectional. I'll bring you champagne and something to nibble on. What if I want to nibble on you? He laughed. That can be arranged. Settling onto the ivory leather, Luna took off her sandals and slid them under the coffee table. The chocolate brown carpet under her bare feet was thicker and softer than any she'd stepped on. She might never be in a place like this again, so she might as well make the most of it. Colin walked around the end of the sectional and deposited the food plate on the coffee table before handing her a flute of champagne with the bubbles rising merrily to the top. That just looks like a party. George didn't spare any expense. This is top-of-the-line bubbly. I can see what you mean about him showing off. What do you suppose he wants? He told us. Colin came back with his own glass and sat down next to her. He wants in on Whittier House. I think he would have liked to establish a resort himself and you beat him to it. I got ahead of a pack alpha? You did. Colin raised his glass. To Luna Reynaud. I don't think I can drink to myself. Yes, you can. We're all alone in this insanely expensive penthouse, so we can do whatever we bloody well feel like. She laughed. I like your attitude, your lairdness. If you don't stop calling me that, I'll start thinking that's right. So are we drinking to you? We are. She touched her glass to his. To Luna Reynaud, who dreamed up a concept that's the envy of a pack alpha who's richer than God. She took a sip of her champagne. That even tastes rich. Trust me, it's as rich as it tastes. She took another sip. I could get used to this. Don't. That's what he wants. I'm sure this is all an elaborate bribe to convince me to let him have a share of the action. But why? He obviously has more money than he'll ever need, so why mess around with a little inn on a remote island? It wouldn't be worth his time. He can't stand the fact that someone's launching an interesting and potentially successful business in his own backyard, and he's not part of it. Colin picked up the plate of food and held it out. You'll like this too, but don't get used to it. Should we pack up our things and take a cab to the nearest cheap sleep? That would be a deliberate slap in the face. We stay the night, enjoy ourselves. He paused to wiggle his eyebrows at her and thank him profusely for his hospitality. But when he asks again to have a share in Whittier House, we tell him no. And then what? Luna bit into a strawberry. Oh my God, this strawberry is so sweet it should be illegal. That's because George gets the best. And he can see that Whittier House is going to be the first and no doubt the best retreat in the Pacific Northwest. Luna wasn't sure she liked the idea of going head-to-head with the likes of George Trevelyan. You didn't answer my question. What happens when he asks again after treating us to this posh penthouse, and he still gets the cold shoulder? He gazed at her. I don't know. I guess that's why I'd like you to clear things with your grandparents soon. I don't want George to insert himself into that situation. He might be a nephew, but I think a granddaughter trumps a nephew. Luna's tummy began to hurt, so she drank more champagne, which helped. This isn't a game. It is to George. She gazed at him. Not to me. Chapter 17. Colin debated, once again, whether he dared extend his stay so he'd be around to deal with George's manipulations. But when he'd used his phone to cancel the reservations at the Space Needle, he'd seen a text message from Duncan, who wanted him to call as soon as he could. Duncan was about to do something rash. Colin could feel it. A phone call probably wouldn't stop him either, but it might delay whatever daft thing Duncan planned to do concerning his girlfriend Molly. Colin was torn between the beautiful woman sitting next to him sipping champagne, and his obligation to keep his family from descending into chaos. To further complicate matters, his father was extremely conservative in addition to being in ill health. The last time Colin had talked with his mother, she'd hinted that if Duncan went through with his threat to mate with a human, it might send his father into cardiac arrest. The text message from Duncan weighed on Colin's mind. Maybe it wouldn't be so terrible if he made a quick call while Luna sipped champagne and ate gourmet finger sandwiches and strawberries that had been handpicked by cherubs, singing the Hallelujah chorus. Luxury had its uses. I hate to do this, he said, but I had a message from home and I think it might be a good idea if I checked in. Go right ahead. Luna gestured with her champagne glass. I know you have a crisis going on over there. He grimaced. Right. That's why you were treated to my unpleasant rant this morning. I'm over that, Colin. You have your reasons, good ones I'm sure, for thinking the way you do, and it has nothing to do with me. It's not as if what we're sharing now is a long-term thing. Hearing her talk so casually about their relationship when her eyes told a different story left a bitter taste. Yet she was right. Come to think of it, she had a more sensible attitude than he had. She knew exactly where they stood while he was still trying to bargain with fate to change the status quo. Let me give you a wee bit more champagne before I go. That's fine. It's very good champagne. She smiled at him as he refilled her glass. But I promise not to get used to it. Tomorrow I'll go back to the usual rot gut. She had a gift for making him laugh, and he was going to miss that along with every other wonderful thing about Luna. If he were more evolved, he'd be able to enjoy the present moment with her, and not anticipate the eventual heartbreak when they parted. Apparently he wasn't that evolved, because thoughts of leaving her polluted every blessed moment of being with her. Bloody hell. He added more champagne to his own glass before carrying it and his phone to the master bedroom. As he waited for the call to go through, he pulled back the drapes and discovered Seattle spread beneath him. In a couple of hours, when it grew dark and the lights came on, it would be quite a view, nearly as good as the Space Needle. Duncan answered on the second ring. Colin had forgotten to estimate the time change and belatedly realized it must be about 2 in the morning in Scotland. Sorry, did I wake you? No, brother mine, you did not. The sound of rustling sheets and the murmurings of a female voice filtered through the phone line. But you did interrupt me. Oh, bollocks. He'd called when his brother was having sex with the very woman everyone was so concerned about. Can't be helped now, Duncan said. Let me head on into the other room so Molly doesn't have to be bored with our conversation. Make very sure she can't hear it. Colin took a good long sip of his champagne. The last thing he needed was for the woman to overhear a mention of werewolves. Don't worry. Colin couldn't help but worry. He didn't see any way this was going to go well, and he resented being forced to abandon Luna while he counseled his little brother on a proper course of action. It didn't escape him that Luna was no more suitable for him than Molly was for Duncan, but at least Colin hadn't proposed mating with her. His heart might yearn for that, but it would be madness. She wouldn't agree to it anyway, considering how attached she was to Whittier House. All right, Duncan said in a weary tone. Here's the situation. Molly expects me to marry her, which in her world is the way these things go. Ring church. Honeymoon. I'm aware of the rituals. I can do all those things even if they're not part of our belief system, but it's time for me to tell her who the hell I am and find out how she feels about that. I just wanted to warn you before I told her. Colin's chest tightened. Do you have any idea how she'll take that news? She loves me. I think she'll accept it. That's not good enough, Dunk. Colin felt a headache coming on. If Luna were here, she'd probably mention that the vein in his temple had popped out again. Don't tell her yet. If she doesn't react well, you'll put all worse in danger. And think of her welfare. She might have to be sequestered if she's a security risk. She'll be fine, Colin. It's time for Wers to start the gradual process of intermingling. Pastime. I need to tell her. Even if she reconsiders and decides not to stay with me, she's not the kind of person who would call out the mob with the pitchforks. She's very tolerant. I know she'd help us to be accepted. Colin set his champagne glass on the bedside table so he could massage his forehead. You're talking about a cultural shift. We're not ready for that yet. We may never be ready. It starts one person at a time. Do you love her? Are you sure without a shadow of a doubt that she's destined to be your mate? I love her, but this mating business is old-fashioned hocus-pocus. I love her for being the non-judgmental, generous person she is, and she's a perfect candidate to start moving Scottish wers out of the dark ages. Colin groaned. You don't mate with someone because she'll be a good ambassador for Scottish wers. You mate with her because she completes you. Because she's the female you're destined to be with for the rest of your life. Duncan snorted. Hey, what's with the lecture on destiny and endless love all of a sudden, big brother? You don't talk about your plans much, but whenever you do, I get the impression you'll choose the most suitable were, almost as if you're hiring someone for a job. Colin had begun pacing during the phone call, but the accuracy of that statement stopped him in his tracks. I might have said something like that in the past, but it's not the ideal. You sure fooled me. I thought you were all about sensible matches. I was, but coming back here and being reminded of what Aunt Geraldine and Uncle Henry had together has given me a lot to think about. I'm dying to hear the results of all that intense brainstorming. Colin grimaced, knowing he was still mentally tied in knots over the question. I hope to fall madly in love with someone who's also a suitable mate. Duncan laughed. Good luck with that, old chap. Yes, well, we're talking about you now, aren't we? Choosing a mate could be the single most important decision you make, Duncan, whether she's were or human. Promise me you won't say anything to her until I meet her. I don't know if I can wait that long. When are you coming back? She's going on vacation in a couple of weeks, and I'd like to get this settled before she leaves. Colin took a deep breath and reminded himself that his brother still had some maturing to do. Impatience was part of his makeup and his zeal for changing. The status quo was making him think he should mate with someone who might understand when he revealed that he was a shapeshifter. Colin didn't like those odds, but no doubt Duncan found them to be an exciting challenge. I'll get home as soon as I can, he said. In the next few days if possible. I'll definitely beat that vacation deadline of hers. Just give me the courtesy of meeting her, talking with her. If she's going to be a permanent part of our family, I'd like at least that much consideration. Because you're the big bad alpha? No, because I'm your only brother, and I love you. That produced a moment of silence on the other end. All right, Duncan said. At last. I'll hold off until you get back here and can meet her. Once you do, you'll understand. That would be good. I very much want to understand. I'll let you return to her now. Thanks. Duncan paused again. I have to say, I guess you have been thinking. Because you sound different. I do? How? I don't know exactly, but it's as if you're listening to me for a change. Expected you to yell at me, but you didn't. If you had yelled, I probably would have told you to sod off, and I would have told Molly everything tonight. But I'll wait. Thanks, Duncan. See you soon. You too. Colin blew out a breath as he turned off the phone, tucked it in his slacks pocket, and picked up his champagne. Close call. Sadly, Duncan's description of his former attitude toward the mating process was dead on, and it had been dead wrong. He could no longer settle for mere affection from a mate who was suitable. He needed passion as part of the bargain. Luna had shown him that she might not be his destiny, but she was his equal in passion and fire. As he sipped his champagne, he thought about her and whether she and Duncan would get along. He almost wished they would have a chance to meet because, instinctively, he knew they'd be friends. That idea didn't bother him in the same way he'd been bothered by Knox Trevelyan's attentions to Luna. For all Duncan's impetuous behavior, he would never make a move on a female Colin wanted. At bottom, Duncan was a good-hearted chap with a zest for life. But that enthusiasm got him into more trouble than anywhere Colin knew. Consequently, he'd been a bloody pain in this. Although he was only 4 years younger than Colin, some days it had seemed like 10. But they'd had good times too, some moments when Duncan had made him laugh until his ribs ached. Now Colin was needed back at Glenbarra to talk Duncan down off the ledge. That meant his days with Luna were nearly at an end. With that in mind, he started to leave the bedroom, but then decided to take a quick look around first. A glance into the bathroom revealed a promising jacuzzi tub placed next to a window. If the view wouldn't make Luna dizzy, they could have a good time in there. After today's hot tub shopping, he knew that she had an imagination. When it came to benches and jets, the bedroom also looked promising. The raised platform bed was at least king-sized, maybe even custom-made to be larger. It was covered with various shapes and sizes of pillows, all snowy white. The bed had been designed as a playground, and Colin hoped they'd use it that way. A chest sat at the end of it, and when Colin pushed a button, the top slid back and a flat-screen monitor rose from its depths. Planning to catch a reality show or two? He turned toward the doorway. Luna rested a shoulder against the doorframe, her half-full champagne flute dangling between two fingers. Or maybe your taste runs more toward X-rated videos, she said. I'm sure those are available. I'm sure they are. Holding her gaze, he pushed the button again and the flat screen whirred back down into its cabinet. I don't need them. As if to prove that point, his groin stirred. He deposited his glass on the top of the cabinet. I didn't hear your voice anymore, so I decided to wander in and find out if you're okay. Pushing away from the doorframe, she moved into the room. He crossed to meet her and slid one hand around her waist and the other beneath her hair to cup the back of her neck. You have a caring nature, Luna Reynaud, to ask about my problems at home. He began a gentle massage, taking pleasure in the feel of her silky skin under his fingertips. Her green eyes darkened in response to the simple caress. I don't have a sister or brother, but it must be distressing to have issues and be so far away. Resting her palm on his chest, she reached up with her champagne flute and rubbed the cool glass against his temple. I'll bet that pesky vein popped out again. I'm sure it did, but it's better now. Here I was out there relaxing like a princess, and you were in here arguing with your brother. It wasn't so bad. She stopped rubbing his temple and brought the flute down to his mouth. Have some more of this stuff. It's very tasty and will wash away all your cares. She tipped the glass. He swallowed the fizzy champagne and smiled at her as she lowered the glass. You're fussing over me. I am. Is that okay? It feels wonderful, lass. I can't remember the last time someone fussed over me. Everyone needs it once in a while, especially a big strong laird who takes all the responsibility for his pack on his very broad shoulders. You make me sound like a hero, and I'm not. Y'all are a hero to me, and probably to Duncan too when he stops to admit it. Colin nestled her closer. I don't know about that, but he complimented me on listening to him for a change. I have you to thank for that. Me? Why? He savored the way she settled against him so trustingly. You've challenged my assumptions and poked holes in my belief system. Before I met you, my world was divided into black and white, wers and humans. And now, that kind of sharp division doesn't exist for me anymore. Can't, because it would put me on one side and you on the other. I couldn't live without us being friends. What a ridiculously inadequate word that was. Neither could I. Her gaze searched his. Does that mean you won't object if Duncan mates with a human? I'll still object if he's only doing it to make a statement, and judging from what he said, I think that's his main motivation. Will he go ahead anyway? I hope to talk him out of it, but I have to do it in person. A stricken look flashed briefly in her eyes and was gone, replaced by acceptance. That makes perfect sense. In person is always better. Unfortunately, I'll need to leave very soon, perhaps in a couple of days if I can arrange it. Right. She nodded, as if the matter was not up for debate. He's agreed to hold off telling her he's were until I've met her. Once I've seen them together, I'll have a much better idea of whether they're meant to be mated. No one should choose a mate, whether she's were or human, to prove a point. No, I suppose not. She gazed up at him, her green eyes giving nothing away. Why should they choose one then? His heart contracted. She would have to ask the hard question. But he owed her his best answer, culled from his most recent thinking. Because they've found someone they can't live without. He was very much afraid he'd done exactly that. But what if the other someone doesn't feel the same? Ah, the cold slap of reality. If she'd begun to guess his feelings, she was reminding him that both parties had to be fully committed. Then perhaps they're not destined to be mates, he said. Perhaps not. She took a deep breath. Then she gave him a bright smile. Well, enough deep philosophy. I see you discovered the flat screen that we're not going to make use of. What else do we need to explore before we continue with our decadent evening? She was obviously ready to change the subject and the mood, and he admired her resilience. She could very well be more resilient than he was. There's a hot tub in the bathroom, he said. Is that right? It's next to a window though, so that could prove to be a problem for you. She lifted her glass. All I need is y'all and more champagne. That I can provide. For now at least. Maybe before he left he'd order a case of that bubbly for her. It was a poor substitute for being there personally, but it would have to do. Chapter 20. Luna thought about Colin's suggestion as they ate fried peanut butter and banana sandwiches on the floor in the living room next to the window. Gazing out at the lights of the harbor, she felt only a squiggle of uneasiness, even though they sat right beside the glass. Colin had helped her to grow in so many ways. He'd encouraged her to find her sexual self, and she realized that her werewolf self, while technically functioning, was dormant. Without a pack, without encouragement from other wers, she'd allowed that side of her to languish. She'd paid a price for that too. Sometimes she'd have the overwhelming urge to shift, and repressing it cost her in lost sleep and a troubled mind. But if she didn't feel safe to embrace her other side, then she wasn't going to risk. Colin created a safety net, one that would be available for only a short time. Licking her fingers, she glanced at the empty plate of sandwiches. What did y'all think? He laughed. I was hungry enough to eat anything, probably even haggis. These take some getting used to. My mother used to fix them for me. In that case, lass, I'm glad you ordered them. It's good to remember those things and I got to try something unusual. But my next dinner will include a rare steak. It's more suited to a werewolf's constitution. I totally understand. She admired him for eating the sandwiches without complaint. And I'll join you in that steak dinner. Excellent. He gazed at her, an unspoken question in his eyes. She knew without asking that he was waiting for her decision. Her heart rate picked up. You'll shift too, right? I will after you do. I've had a lot of practice, so I'm reasonably quick. I've had very little practice, and so I'm excruciatingly slow. She made a face. Y'all will get sick of waiting for me to manage it. I won't. Also, I don't think it's a very attractive process. He smiled. It's like birth, Luna. That's a wee bit weird too, but we celebrate it every time it happens. Shifting should be like that for us. Rebirth. I hadn't thought of it that way. It's always been awkward and shameful. Ah no, never shameful. It's a gift to be able to shift into a completely different sort of being with totally different abilities yet have our mind retain both sets of experiences. Have you experienced telepathy? Like when I can hear thoughts from otherwheres? Only a couple of times by accident. Shifting alone doesn't lend itself to that. His tone was rich with sympathetic understanding. You'd love that part. If you get a chance to do it with someone you know like me, are you willing to try? She wiped her hands on a cloth napkin and put it on her empty plate. Yes, I am. She glanced around the living room. They'd left most of the lights off so they could enjoy the sparkling view below. She spotted a dark corner. I'd like a little privacy. You may think it's like birth and needs to be celebrated, and someday maybe I'll have that attitude. But I don't yet. Whatever makes you feel comfortable. He gathered the dishes from their meal. I'll put these on the bar and sit here waiting for you. Have you ever watched someone else shift? No, her heart raced at the thought, which was both scary and fascinating. Would you like to watch me do it? She hesitated. If y'all don't mind. I'd be honored if I'm the first where you've ever seen shift. As a teenager, we were always watching each other. It was like a game, so I'm not shy about. But if you didn't grow up like that, it might take you some time to lose that shyness. I can't even begin to say how much I envy your upbringing. Envy is a terrible emotion, but I'm feeling it now. I want the childhood you had. But the childhood you had created the amazing and talented were that you are. He stood and offered her his hand. She allowed him to help her up and draw her into his arms. There was nothing sexual in his embrace, and for that she was grateful. She wrapped her arms around his solid warmth and held on. Apparently he understood that if he distracted her in a sexual way, she would never go through with her shift. She needed a friend more than she needed a lover. He held her close, his cheek resting on top of her head. You can do this, Luna. You're braver than anyone I know. You help me find my courage. But it's there waiting when you look. He hugged her tight and released her. Go on with you now. With one last glance at him, she started toward the dark corner. She turned back. As I said, I could be very slow. He smiled. Take your time. I don't have any pressing appointments. She turned away quickly so he wouldn't see her eyes fill up. He was everything she'd never realized she wanted. She was grateful that fate and perhaps Geraldine had brought him into her life. If he left and never came back, she would be heartbroken. But she'd rather be heartbroken than to never have known him at all. Making her way into the dark corner, she stretched out on the carpet. This was the most luxurious surface she'd ever used for shifting, that was for sure. She'd shifted on threadbare carpets, on dirty floors, on the cold ground. This would be a treat. But it wouldn't be easy. Lying there with her eyes closed, she conjured up the images that she'd learned would initiate her shift. She imagined deep, cool woods. Her feet now paws scattered leaves as she raced through the darkness, and her vision became tuned to the night and the creatures dwelling there. The images wouldn't hold. Her concentration was affected by her surroundings, and the male were sitting on the floor only 20 feet away. He wasn't looking at her, but he was thinking about her. She knew that even though she couldn't yet read his mind. She covered her face with her hands and strained to focus. It had never occurred to her that by not using her gift she might lose it. What if she could no longer shift? Then she'd lose that special link with Colin. Colin. She imagined him as a magnificent wolf, his coat burnished with starlight, She envisioned the varied colors of chocolate brown and caramel in his ruff. He would be powerfully built with massive shoulders and a wide, intelligent head. She wanted to know Colin as a wolf, and unless she could shift, she never would. His eyes would be the same clear blue, but they would be wolf's eyes as they gazed silently into hers. With a shiver of awareness, she pictured herself as a wolf looking into Colin's wolf eyes, and she felt the beginning of her shift. Not so with shifting. Her muscles contracted, although there was no pain as there had been with her first shift. Her skin began to itch as hair grew where before she'd had only milky white skin. Her vision changed, giving her a different view of the darkened room. Furniture loomed larger, and scents grew sharper. What had seemed familiar became foreign because it was an environment for humans, not for a wild creature of the forest. And then, as if a final switch had been thrown, she became a wolf. Energy flowed through her, giving her a heady feeling of grace and power. Rising to her feet, she padded over to where Colin sat immobile, as if mesmerized by the lights beyond the window. At her approach, he turned his head. His breath caught. "My God, you're beautiful. I knew you would be, but my imagination didn't do you justice." Those were words of praise she'd never heard before, words she'd craved. Without realizing it, her wolf form was pleasing to him. That meant more than he could know. He smiled. It didn't take so very long either. It hadn't, and she wondered if he'd beamed his thoughts toward her, boosting her ability. With Colin, she would believe anything was possible. "Now it's my turn." He stretched out on his side and closed his eyes. His muscles relaxed, and he exhaled in a long, heartfelt sigh of total surrender. He likes this, she realized. For him it was a privilege to shift, not an embarrassing compulsion to be avoided if possible. She had so much to learn. Although she'd been afraid the transformation would repel her, she watched in complete fascination. As his shift began, he seemed to glow from within. Maybe she did too. She had no way of knowing. The glow suffused his entire body as the transformation proceeded far more quickly than hers. But as he'd said, he had a lot of practice. In less than a minute, he rose from the carpet and stood before her. He was huge, much bigger than any common wolf, with a powerful chest that indicated he could run for miles without tiring. His chocolate and caramel coat gleamed with good health, and his blue eyes flashed with intelligence. He was as awe-inspiring as she'd imagined he would be. Walking toward her, he touched his nose to hers. "Welcome to our world, Luna." She felt his words stream through her mind, and she responded, dazed by the wonder of being able to communicate with him like this. "It's beautiful. You're beautiful." He snorted. "Would you be willing to say I'm handsome instead?" She looked into his eyes and saw the twinkle there. This wolf truly was Colin. Her Colin. She'd had so little experience interacting with other wolves that she could easily forget that he was the same where she'd known in human form. With an elaborate bow, she sent out another thought. "Y'all are extremely handsome, you're much honored Laird of Glimbara. Saucy wench." He leaped upon her, bowling her over, and they wrestled on the soft carpet, nipping playfully at each other. But gradually she felt a change in the mood. He licked her face more than he nipped at it, and when he pinned her to the carpet, she became aware of the heat radiating from his powerful body. His scent changed from earthy to a more tantalizing aroma, one she found irresistible. The ache that began deep in her womb was familiar. She wanted him, wanted this wolf in the same way she'd wanted him in human form. She whined and licked his face. His voice, rolling through her mind, held a note of urgency and warning. "We must be careful, lass. Keep your mind free of any thoughts of commitment, of permanence, or we will be mated." She shot the words back at him. "See that y'all do the same. Bonding takes two. I want you very much. And you deserve to know the joy of coming together as wolves. Just be careful." She gazed into his wolf's eyes, her heart thudding rapidly. "I will be." Then, acting on an instinct she didn't know she possessed, she turned, presenting him with her hindquarters. With a low growl, he mounted her. Wonder surged through her veins at the intensity of that moment when he entered her. Sex with him in human form had been incredible, but this touched her in a deeper, more primitive way, as if he claimed her with each powerful thrust. But he was not claiming her, and she would not claim him. She forced those dangerous thoughts from her mind and concentrated instead on the pleasure rose within her. a fountain of hot passion. The sensuous slide of his penis gave her reason enough to join with this virile wolf. His wolf self was as accomplished as his human self. He seemed to know exactly what she needed, and as the pressure built, he pumped faster and faster yet. Her climax rocketed through her with a force that made her stagger. He growled again, pushed home once more, and slumped against her, his massive body shuddering as he poured his hot seed into her. Amazingly, his weight did not topple her. She trembled in the aftermath of their joining, but her legs remained strong. Now she understood why he'd warned her. Having sex as humans was an added bonus, but this was the truest connection a male and a female could have. And if she yearned for that bonding he tried so hard to avoid tonight, she'd have to get over it. With regret a heavy weight on his heart, Colin eased away from Luna. He'd fought hard not to bond with her and hoped he'd succeeded, but the fight had seemed wrong. Avoiding that ultimate connection went against everything he felt for her. But it was for the best. At least he hoped so. His judgment didn't feel particularly reliable at the moment. Once he returned to Glenbarra, he'd be able to think more clearly, and no doubt he'd see that they must always remain friends. Walking up beside her, he licked her face. Are you all right, lass? Her green eyes held a curious mixture of joy and sorrow. Yes, very much so. Like that, Colin. So did I. You were wonderful. And you've worn me out. He hated admitting that, but weariness settled over him, and he would need sleep soon. Considering what they'd been through in the past 24 hours, she must be as exhausted as he was. We both need sleep, but we should shift first. All right. He understood her reluctance to go to sleep in wolf form. She wasn't used to being that vulnerable, and although he thought they were perfectly safe up here, he wouldn't try to talk her out of it. She gazed at him intently. When you shifted, your body glowed. That's the way of it. And when you shift back, the same. She blinked as if not quite believing it. Would I glow too? You would. He was amazed that she didn't know that, but why would she? She'd never had anyone guide her through the process. But if you doubt it, you can go first and I'll confirm that you glow. I would like that, Colin. She settled down on the carpet and rolled to her side. Then she closed her eyes and heaved a sigh. He wondered if she had the energy to shift back, or if she'd fall asleep like that. If she did, he'd simply curl up beside her. They could always shift in the morning. But she wasn't asleep. Her luxurious dark coat grew luminescent, and the process began. He watched over her tenderly. She was so delicate and yet so strong. He'd never met such a combination of feminine sweetness and iron will. He'd heard of steel magnolias, women raised in the American South, and perhaps that described her nature as much as anything. She was quicker at shifting this time, and soon she lay before him in human form, white-skinned and blushing under his scrutiny. Did I glow? Oh wait, I forgot. Y'all can't speak. She sat up and made a flapping motion with both hands. Go ahead and shift. She was a bossy wee thing when she chose to be, and he found that endearing, too. Like an obedient dog, he dropped down beside her, rolled to his side, and began his shift. He did it very quickly because if he stayed in that position too long he'd nod off. If she was in human form he wanted to be too. Once he accomplished that, he sat up and gazed at her. Yes, you glowed. Was magical. She clapped her hands together. Magical. I don't have to worry about being ugly when I shift. It's magical. And so are you. He stood and held out both hands. Come with me. We're going to bed, and we're only going to sleep in that bed. She grasped his hands and allowed him to pull her to her feet. Amen to that. But she glanced up at him, a twinkle in her eye. But come morning all bets are off. He laughed and walked with her hand in hand back to their oversized bed. They turned off all the lights, leaving the room bathed in an amber sparkle from the city spread below the window. It's too bad we're both so tired. She stood next to the window and looked out. It would be lovely to have sex right here with the lights shining on us. No more acrophobia? A little. She glanced over at him. But that would make it all the more exciting to be sort of scared and aroused at the same time. Dear God, I've created a monster. Now you'll turn into a thrill seeker. His cock twitched. Do you want to do that? I could probably manage one more. No, I don't want to. She smiled and walked over to the bed. Well, I do, but I'm ready to fall asleep standing up. Let's go to bed. You talked me into it. They settled naturally into a sleeping position as if they'd been sharing a bed for years. She turned her back to him and he curved his body against hers spoon fashion, with his arm tucked around her waist. She sighed with obvious contentment. This is nice. I feel as if I could sleep. For a week. Me too. But they couldn't even sleep in tomorrow. In the morning they had to be up and moving if they hoped to pay a visit to her grandparents. How interesting that her grandmother had turned out to be George Trevelyan's. And his eyes snapped open. Bloody hell. He'd been an idiot. Being sleep-deprived and lust-filled was no excuse for not anticipating George's next move. George had casually mentioned that Luna should check out whether she was related to Edwina and Jacques Reynaud. But as Edwina's doting nephew, George wouldn't wait for her to do that, would he? George would want to be on top of things, especially now that he had his eye on Luna's project. By now he would have contacted his aunt about her. No doubt. He'd mentioned that she had a southern accent and a mysterious past, but had apparently started life in New Orleans. He might even describe what she looked like and approximately how old he thought she was. Unless Edwina and Jacques had known nothing about Sophie, the woman their son had loved, highly unlikely, they would now suspect who Luna was. Her plan of cloaking herself for the first meeting was already compromised. He could wake her and tell her that, except that seemed pointless. Whatever happened tomorrow, she'd need sleep in order to face it. And so would he. But no matter how this played out, he would not allow George or the Reynauds, for that matter, to hurt her. Chapter 21. Luna woke up to sunlight streaming in the open window and Colin singing some Scottish ditty in the shower. Taking a deep breath, she caught a whiff of warm cinnamon buns, along with the distinctive scent of bacon. Sitting up, she noticed a cart had been wheeled into the room while she slept. A couple of dining chairs had been placed at either end of it, and 2 covered plates obviously contained their breakfast. 2 carafes held coffee, tea, or both. She wouldn't put it past Colin to have ordered both coffee and tea, so that he'd covered all the bases. The single red rose in a bud vase had probably been a flourish added by the hotel staff and not Colin. No matter. He'd already won her over on that score. With the bouquet of daisies from the Pike Place market, Luna stretched her arms over her head. She could get used to waking up like this, rested, pampered, and happy to be sharing the space with a hunky Scot. Once he turned off the water, she called out to him. Your breakfast is getting cold. Come and eat. Climbing out of bed, she thought about getting a robe out of the closet and decided against it. If she could shift in front of Colin, then she could certainly eat breakfast naked in front of him. He walked in from the bathroom still toweling off that gorgeous body. She looked him up and down as she sashayed closer. If y'all want, I can finish the job with my tongue. She took great satisfaction in watching his reaction, especially the one south of the Mason-Dixon line. He grinned at her. I thought you were worried about our breakfast getting cold. I am. I just said that because I wanted to see what would happen. He gestured toward his crotch. I already noticed. And the harder he became, the wetter she got. You're quite the tease, aren't you now? Stepping toward her, he looped the towel around her waist and dragged her against him. I'll teach you to taunt my wee man and get him agitated. I'm so frightened. His laughing blue gaze roamed over her. I can see that. Your nipples are scared stiff. Dropping the towel, he spanned her waist with both hands, lifted her up and spun her toward the nearest wall. With arms braced on either side of her head, he caged her there. Now what have you got to say for yourself? Lifting her chin, she gave him a wicked smile and took hold of his cock. Think you can manhandle me? I do. He grasped her wrist and easily removed her hand. And I will. I hope. You like cold eggs, lass, because your breakfast is about to be delayed. Oh no. Flushed and giggling, she pushed against his muscled chest. Anything but that. Too late for pleading. Cupping her bottom in both hands, he lifted her up against the wall, probed once and shot the bolt home. She gasped with delight. Well done. He dragged in air. You could help, if you'd wrap your lovely legs around my arse. She complied, and she also braced her hands on his shoulders for better balance. I love it when you talk Scottish. Ah, do ye now? But ye like action better than speech, I ken. With that he began to drive into her with sure, masterful strokes. She said with a strangled moan. I do. He plunged into her until she was cross-eyed with pleasure, yet begging for more. I'll give ye more, ye sexy wench. He boosted her up the wall so that he was pushing up and in. The different angles stimulated a whole different set of nerve endings. Oh, she began to pant. Like that, do ye? He increased the pace. Yes, yes, she exploded, coming with a joyous shout of release as he continued to pound into her. Again. She gulped for air. Again. Oh yes. His breathing was ragged. You can. He thrust upward and rhythmically squeezed her bottom with his long, talented fingers. She came again, crying and whimpering with the beauty of it, whispering her gratitude as she convulsed around the sure strokes of his thick penis. Then and only then did he surge forward, quivering in the grip of his own orgasm. Breathing hard, he leaned his forehead against hers. Incredible. I didn't know I could. I did. There was a smile in his voice. Oh, I did. You just needed a little rest is all. Colin happily ate a cold breakfast, but he wasn't happy at all knowing he had to deliver the insight that had come to him right before he'd fallen asleep. He waited until Luna finished eating. He would much rather have said nothing and kept the mellow mood they'd established. More than mellow, actually. On some level, if he could shut out the problems with his family and whatever Luna would face with the Reynauds, he'd never felt more at peace in his life. With Luna he felt at home and settled in a way he never had with anyone else. He hated like the devil to shatter that feeling, both for his sake and hers. But she needed to hear his conclusions. She was understandably distressed. So my grandparents may already know who I am. It's quite possible. He took another swallow of his tea, thanks to the carafe that was still hot. But maybe not. It depends on whether George did what I would expect of him, and how much Edwina and Jacques knew about your mother. I have no idea. She told me the bare minimum about my father, obviously, leaving out the most important fact, and she never mentioned his parents. She brightened. Maybe she never met them. Maybe because she was human he kept her a big dark secret. Even if he tried to, you said that somewheres you talked to mention that he died going after a woman. His parents found that out, I'm sure. Probably, but if they never saw her. She continued to look hopeful that her plan would work. Do you resemble her? Yes. I have her picture in my room at Whittier House. I look a lot like her. In a way, that's better than if you looked like their son. They'd pick up on that immediately. Luna glanced at the clock on the bedside table. It's almost 9. What should we do? Get dressed. Well, duh. He couldn't help laughing. I'm serious. Until you put some clothes on, you're a walking temptation to forget all about this and take you back to bed. Her green eyes grew serious. Maybe we should forget all about this. We don't have to hook up with the Byron Reynaud Foundation. They may suspect something. But if I never go knocking on their door, they might not find out for a long time if ever. They're old, right? Not that old. He shook his head. If you're imagining you can wait them out, keep this under the rug until they die off, then. Not exactly. Well, sort of, but I don't want anything to happen to them. Just that. I'm scared. I know, he said gently. But think of all the scary things you've conquered recently. Taking a risk and meeting them is just one more. What's the worst that could happen? She took a shaky breath. The worst that could happen is that the two living relatives who would understand my nature could be forever lost to me if they reject me and say nasty things about my mother. If I never go to them, then I can hang on to my fantasy that they would have loved me if given the chance. She shrugged. Maybe that makes no sense. It makes sense. But it's the coward's way out, and you've proven to me time and again that you are no coward. She met his gaze. Damn your hide, Colin MacDowell, she said softly. Y'all expect so much of me. Because I know you can do it. A smile tipped the corners of her mouth. Sort of like having 2 climaxes in a row. Don't you dare start talking about sex. Who knows? Maybe with the right circumstances I could have 3 in a row. With a groan, Colin left his chair and grabbed his phone from the bedside table. He'd keyed in the number for the Byron Reynaud Foundation yesterday, and he clicked on it now. Want to have phone sex? She left her chair and came over to stand beside him. Go into the living room and I'll call your phone from the one on the nightstand. This is for your own good, Luna. He put the phone to his ear and willed his erection to subside. He couldn't make her go see her grandparents, but he could set it up for her and give her the option of going or not. I have a bad feeling about this. Trust me. That's what they all say. She looked worried. A receptionist named Angela answered the phone. Yes, Angela, this is Colin MacDowell, Laird of Glenbarra. Show off, Luna muttered. Colin ignored her. I now own Whittier House in the San Juan Islands and I plan to convert it to an inn. I'd like to make an appointment for me and my associate, Luna Reynaud, to meet with Mr. and Mrs. Reynaud today about having a benefit for their foundation on our opening weekend. Luna Thisbe. Colin turned his back on her as the receptionist asked what time. This morning if possible. Yes, 11 would be fine. See you then. He disconnected the phone. She regarded him with a dark expression. Now you've gone and done it. And you used my real name. George Trevelyan knows your real name, so you might as well give up that idea. He gazed at her and waited to see what she would do. You don't have to go. If it's really that frightening, I can call back and cancel the appointment, but if I'm right about George and his strategic nature, you'll have to face them, perhaps sooner rather than later. And when I do, you won't be here. Probably not. She swallowed. Then I want to go this morning with you. That's my girl. But if they're mean then? If they're even slightly mean or the least bit rude, we'll leave. I won't let them tear you to shreds, Luna. That's why I want to go with you, to be your backup. What if it turns into a scandal and affects business at the inn before we even open? I'm not a shrewd businessman like George, but I have paid some attention, because lairds are expected to do that. I've noticed that scandal doesn't usually hurt business. If anything, it helps. Oh great. Luna rolled her eyes. Are you hoping for a scandal then? Of course not. He set his phone on the nightstand and took her by the shoulders. As he did so, he told himself to resist the soft temptation of her skin beneath his fingers. I want this meeting to go well for your sake and theirs. But if it doesn't, don't worry about the inn. If I ever doubted it would be a huge success, George's interest tells me we'll have a booming business in no time at all. She held his gaze for several long seconds. Then I guess we'd better get dressed. You're much honored, Laird of Glenbarra. He smiled, and because he couldn't deprive himself completely, he gave her a quick, hard kiss before he let her go. You're sure y'all don't want to try the phone sex thing? He shook his head. We can do better than that once we get back to the island, lass. He was already anticipating the night ahead, and he refused to think about the possibility that it might be their last. Can I see their picture again? Luna spent the cab ride to her grandparents' house alternately checking her lipstick in a small mirror she kept in her purse and asking Colin for his phone so she could look at the picture of Edwina and Jacques Reynaud one more time. He always handed it over with a patient smile. He kept his arm loosely around her shoulders during the ride. A couple of times she started to tell him how much that meant to her, but she was afraid she might get choked up if she started talking about anything really, but feelings in particular. So she squeezed his thigh and hoped he knew that his presence was the single most important part of the trip. The house looked even more imposing than it had in the picture. It was on the right side of the street, and Luna had chosen to sit on the right side of the cab, so she had a fine view as the cab pulled up to the curb. On a street filled with lovely big homes, all with groomed lawns and lavish flower beds, the Reynaud mansion was perhaps the most impressive. The paint seemed whiter, the drapes in the windows more elegant, the flower beds more carefully tended, the lawn more manicured. Sidewalks flanked the street, along with several large shade trees. Their roots had buckled the sidewalk in places, which spoke of the age of the trees and the neighborhood, but other than the cracked sidewalk, nothing was out of place. The homes suggested wealth without trumpeting it. If the owners drove Bentleys and Ferraris, they were obviously tucked away in garages. No children played in any of the front yards and no dogs gambling about fetching sticks. A couple of sleekly dressed runners jogging by on the sidewalk were the only people Luna could see. She stared out the cab window and tried in vain to slow her racing heart. A little cottage would have been easier to deal with, although the people inside were the scariest part. Maybe the size of the house was unimportant. Geraldine had lived in a very large castle, and she'd been a sweetheart. Luna glanced at Colin. I know it will be expensive, but I'd like to have the cab wait for us in case we need to make a quick getaway. I can wait, the driver said, looking back at them from the rearview mirror. Long as you don't mind the meter going all that time. We don't mind, Colin said. Then I'll just pull up under that tree and read my newspaper. Luna swallowed. Then we might as well go in, I guess. Colin was out of the cab in a flash. Let me get your door. His gallantry touched her. Yet this was the same who had backed her up against the wall less than 3 hours ago. She'd loved that too. Whether he was treating her like royalty or coaxing her into a lusty round of sex, she felt like the luckiest female in the world to be near him. She took his hand as he helped her out of the cab. Keep holding on to me, she said. You're sure? I said we were business associates. She laced her fingers through his as they started up a flagstone walkway. Ahead of them, a balcony on the second floor shaded the carved entry door. If George has blabbed to them, he's probably told them we're more than associates. True. He gave her fingers a quick squeeze. That blouse looks great on you. So y'all said when we bought it yesterday. But not because it matches your eyes. It doesn't match my eyes? She knew he was making conversation to distract her, and she appreciated that. Oh, it does match your eyes, but that wasn't the main reason I like it. What was the reason then? When you tuck it into your jeans, your tits look amazing. Colin. She laughed, and that was probably what he'd hoped for. As he reached for the doorbell, the large door swung open before he could push the button. Edwina and Jacques Reynaud were framed in the doorway. Edwina, dressed in a pale blue lightweight suit, her hair perfectly styled, stood in front. Jacques, wearing a short-sleeved shirt and looking considerably more casual, hovered behind her. Edwina stared at Luna. Slowly her mouth opened, but nothing came out. She seemed dazed and disoriented, and her hand went to her heart. Finally she spoke. Sophie. Luna squeezed Colin's hand so hard she felt him wince. No, Mrs. Reynaud. I'm her daughter.